sort of a testimonial to what happened to me,
Mm-hmm.
and what I've learned, and obviously it's such a ubiquitous problem with everybody around the world thinking it's safe, and yet there's probably conservatively over 400 million people who are severely affected, which is more than the population of the United States globally. So it's a huge problem, but yet even with as many as a population of the United States, it seems like we can't make a difference because there's so much power and money pushing this toxin.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I used to work for a large telecom,
Okay.
and my mother also, same kind of work, and I was exposed to traditional high electric fields when I was young because of her job. She was a telephone operator, and she was plugging in to copper while her eggs were exposed to that electric field. She developed major health problems and did not know her entire life that her problems were very likely electrosensitivity. I saw her get very sick and go through the same process that I went through. She started getting very, very sick in the 80s, and we lived, actually, I was born and lived 3 houses away from the phone company.
Mm-hmm.
And the phone company had a giant microwave antenna on the roof for long-distance calls. And so from the time I was born, my mother worked in that building and was surrounded by thousands of copper wires under the ground that terminated in that building and were above her head on the 2nd and 3rd floor for the central office for a phone company for over 100,000 phones. And she worked doing that, and then she left when I was born, before I was born, and we were basically bathed in radiation from microwave antenna that was on the roof. It was a big, it almost looked like a TV screen. It was round, and it was a very strange microwave antenna for long-distance calls, and it was aimed literally over our house. So it was every time a long-distance call, we were being microwaved. And I didn't know, but growing up, I had extreme anxiety for no reason, and had trouble sleeping, and was very depressed. I would cry very easily. I had problems with memory. I had trouble with energy. If we were running, I would run out of breath and be very like a runt, kind of like just everyone else seemed to have more energy. And then I got older and developed a thyroid problem with low thyroid, and had metal in my mouth, and got sicker and more anxiety and muscle tension, muscle spasms, poor appetite, basically every microwave sickness symptom. Headaches. I would get headaches near the cathode ray TVs. I didn't realize that was the cause of the headache, because I was 8 years old, 9, 10, 11, 12, and everybody said growing pains, and so I didn't know what the headaches were caused by. And then I kind of developed an OCD behavior where I would just kind of cycle on the same thoughts and the same kind of just getting stuck, kind of saying the same thing to my mother, asking, things like random, just very, very strange, not feeling like I was out of control, like fight, flight, freeze. It's as though I just wanted to get away. I didn't know why.
Are you okay?
So I ended up getting sicker working for a phone company.
Mm-hmm.
I used to get very sick under fluorescent lights and didn't know why I would feel so weak. And I would have a sugar crash, like my sugar would go up and then crash if I was under fluorescent lights, working on computers. I worked in downtown Boston at a very, I'm sure, high EMF building where they were doing testing to develop things like DSL and working on ISDN lines, and they were working on making like data services. It was a new thing. And they were doing very, very, I guess, it was like Bell Labs, basically, doing a bunch of, they called it information services technology. And I used to get really overwhelmed and had to put my head down out of weakness. And when I would be riding the train, because of the electric fields, I would get shaky and weak, and I would have to sit like on the floor if there were no seats, and I was feeling like I was cold sweats and just a sugar low that would make me feel very sick. And again, I didn't know why. And I got worse working at the phone company's headquarters, where they were experimenting on creating 4G, and that was around 2008 to 2010, and there were 7 buildings, and I was in one of the buildings and walking to a different building where you would get lunch or breakfast, and these buildings were filled with very strong radio frequency and thousands of people with devices and testing devices, and my health got very much worse, and I was in my 30s, and I basically lost the ability to flick off my endocrine system,
mm-hmm.
and hormones weren't working right. And I was having like blocks of memory losses and not sleeping and having more like electric shocks when I would vacuum. It would run up my arm, and I thought it was carpal tunnel. It just felt like this sharp ow, up the arm of pain that would shoot. And I just thought it was my wrist. And as time went on, I left that center and went to a wireless center. And they had a 3G antenna on the roof and Wi-Fi throughout the building. And the roof was not a tall building. It was a 3-story building. And 3G should never be that low. As you see, 3G antennas are usually super high, old-style cell towers, very, very tall. And this was really low. And immediately in that building, I got extremely sick, where I lost 100% of my libido. I had terrible memory problems. People were always ill in this building. Ambulances were called all the time. And we never understood why so many people needed ambulances at work, and we just thought they had weight problems, but they had breathing problems.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up actually where they wanted to move my department up to the top floor. And that was the third floor, the top floor. And I had been generally working on the first and second floor, kind of in the middle of the building. And again, I was surrounded by thousands of phones, tablets, and Wi-Fi, and cellular, and Bluetooth. They had multiple of their own and testing devices that they were using. And so there was just an enormous amount of radio frequency in this building. And my muscles and my nerves started to burn in my neck and in my back, where I felt like I was on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I started losing hair. And a man had a heart attack, and he was 50 years old, and he died at work. And everybody was shocked because he was healthy. Well, he had been seated on the third floor for most of his time, and he was right near these 3 and 4G antennas they put up. They put up 4G in late 2014, and they were 200 feet out the window. And so we had just an enormous amount of radio frequency. And I developed adrenal insufficiency. Other mineral corticoids aren't working, like aldosterone and vasopressin. And I developed tremor, and I developed just an enormous amount of health problems that I'm still dealing with today. And I only was exposed to the 4G for roughly 3 months. I left that job, and things started to calm down, and I actually thought I was okay because I got out of the building, and all of the symptoms I was having, heart flutters, burning face, tones in my ears that were high and low pitches, they all stopped. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be okay. And then I was able to work from home most of the time. We got rid of Wi-Fi out of precautionary principle in 2014, late 2014.
Mm-hmm.
We got rid of cordless phones in late 2014. I didn't use my cell phone very much, like most people. But again, I was living like what I thought was a normal life. And my husband and I bought Teslas. And that was around 2017. And then I got one in 2018. And I only had 4,000 miles on that car because I didn't need it for work. And had it for about a year. And my health deteriorated very rapidly. And I started losing weight and getting dizzy. And I got a really high exposure on one particular day in 2019 after having the car for less than a year, just about a year. And I went to a jury duty where there was no tower. And I knew I would be okay to go there because I always, from 2014, I was like, I just want to be away from towers. And I thought, as long as I'm not near a tower, I'm going to be fine. And I was wrong. So I went to the jury duty, and everybody was using devices, whether they had them in their ears and their tablets and their phones. And it was over 300 people around me, and the signal was so low. So all of the devices put out an enormous amount of radiation to hit the tower. And within 45 minutes, I started having strong heart palpitations and these sharp pains like an ice pick in my head. And it felt sharp, and it would hit me in the temple, and then it would go away, and then it would hit me in the temple, and then it would go away. And I was frozen while I sat there, just shocked. And I didn't even know what to do because I knew that if I said anything, they were going to think it was strange. And I just was horrified that I could feel. And so after that day, I haven't been able to live a normal life. And pretty much I've been struggling to get healthy again, and I've made a lot of progress.
Mm-hmm.
But the world is getting worse, so it's hard to find places to go. And I've lost a tremendous amount of time and money and health and my life because I've been stuck in fight, flight, freeze, and sickness and fear and being afraid to go anywhere and afraid to do anything. And life's been really hard, and I was granted disability for this condition, which I'm very grateful for, but it still doesn't make up for the life I could have had and the life I should have being able to work, and I can't. And so that's kind of the story, but I feel very strongly about making people aware, because I think even with all of the information and knowledge that I have, it took me forever to figure it out, and my mother never figured it out.
What symptoms do you think impacted you the most?
I would say the heart and the head pain, and that it sets up a brain swelling, and I can vomit for hours if I have an exposure. If it's strong and I come home, my head will start to hurt and swell, and I get really sick for a long time.
And what devices would you say impacted you the most?
Cellular towers are the worst, and then next to that now the devices, just because they're so strong and they're so close to people and they're everywhere. So in that order, I avoid towers, and then I have to avoid people.
Do you think
Bluetooth is horrible? Bluetooth is the most painful. Bluetooth and Wi-Fi apparently is supposedly the ugliest frequency, according to a microwave expert. He says it causes immense anxiety and depression and suicide in the Wi-Fi frequency to the brain. It's very ugly.
Do you think governments are aware of the harmful effects of EMF? And are they doing enough?
Yes. No. The studies show the government of the United States knew as early as 1966 and 1971. You can read the studies that are the Naval Research Medical Institute Research Center from 1971 by Zori Glaser, and 1966 Department of Defense Aerospace Institute also shows that the biological effects from electromagnetic waves cause a reduced intellectual capability, laziness, neurotic problems, blood pressure changes that can lead to collapse, cardiac problems. These are all documented government studies, so they know.
And what products or anything have you tried so far that help you out regarding EHS?
Avoidance and shielded clothing, shielded items to protect the home and to sleep, shielded canopy. Those are the most effective.
And would you be open to trying new products to prevent EHS?
Usually, I do a lot of research, and it depends on the product. Yes.
So we're also trying to develop a product that protects an individual from EHS, along with promoting this cause through this film documentary. So we can send you a complimentary sample if you want to try out.
That would be fine.
Okay. Anything you would like to add that everyone should know about in this documentary?
I just really beg people to look and research and think about how they feel today and how they used to feel like 20 years ago, 30 years ago before wireless. Most people wouldn't have the electrical exposure problems that I have if they lived a normal life, but the wireless is affecting everything, including the bees and birds that can't navigate. It affects the magnetite in their brain, so we're losing tons of insects and birds and bees. You know, we used to have windshields full of insects, but we don't have that anymore because we're eradicating entire species with wireless that animals can't navigate and survive in. And it's disrupting the whole ecosystem. In fact, one of the biggest problems I find with this is the power consumption. All of these towers and all of these devices take all of the charging, all of the ridiculous use of something that has to radiate constantly, that shouldn't have to radiate constantly. All of these things are for fun instead of necessary. If they were used responsibly for emergency or necessary, just text or talk instead of fun and games and boredom, because people are just so addicted, they don't see the harm they're causing and the waste and the environmental impact, which is massive. It's probably affecting the weather. It's probably affecting the whole planet has a frequency, and we're pumping artificial frequencies, and it's disrupting everything. And people need to understand every time they do something with wireless devices, their own impact on hurting the planet and hurting everything on it, including the soil biome and everything else. It's a very complex issue, but it's extremely harmful to everything.
And what would you say after the introduction of 5G? Is that making things worse, or?
Extremely. Those devices I can't be near. They're extremely toxic. No one should be around anything that has millimeter wave or the frequencies that are used for nationwide 5G that are not small cell. They travel much further in building penetration and much more damage to the body. There's also the man-made jackhammer of this on-off, on-off. There's a correlation that the constant on-off pulsing can even weaken structures over time, like the way a river can erode the Grand Canyon. Mm-hmm. So there's a potential for all of these towers that are aimed at different structures that could actually be weakening these structures, and no one even thinks of that. And then they also can be turned up, the intensity and the power of these towers, where literally it can be weaponized so easily. You could eradicate almost a population of a city by cranking up the towers, because your brain would probably burst from swelling if these frequencies were weaponized, and they could be so easily. Mm-hmm. And everyone is just fine with towers being placed everywhere.
That's very interesting, Laurie. Thank you for your input. In the long term, what do you think would be the solution to all of this?
Wired technology, wireless as emergency only, mm-hmm. Wireless going back to landlines and call boxes on the highway, like literally just going back to having safe ways to communicate, mm-hmm. that are not destroying the planet and our body and our cells. And thank you for doing what you're doing.
No problem. There are many people who are impacted by EHS, and It's a cause that we seem is getting unnoticed.
It's epidemic, and yet no one seems to know why they're chronically sick, or why they can't think straight, or why they have a terrible mood,